My central question was how people get rich.
With me tonight is George Gilder.
Will you welcome Mr. George Gilder, then?
George is a prolific author, a bold thinker, and one of the most influential economic voices of the past half-century.
George Gilder described the economy as essentially a phone line. What do you want on a phone line? You want clarity.
President Trump is getting ready to announce new tariffs today.
In order to have a productive economy, you have to have low entropy carriers.
His book, Wealth and Poverty, became the cornerstone of President Reagan's economic philosophy.
George Gilder wrote, "Most successful entrepreneurs contribute far more to society than they ever recover."
And I told him my next book was going to be about sex.
How many threatening letters have you gotten, George?
The one thing female-headed families can't do, they can't raise boys. Can't.
Over the years, George has continued to shape the conversation on technology and economics.
You're talking about cutting-edge information theory.
Wealth is essentially knowledge.
Beyond his intellectual influence, George is a man of deep Christian faith.
In the beginning was the Word.
And it's a privilege to have you to our home tonight. Maybe you could just tell a little bit about your path, because you didn't have the normal path. I mean, you went to college, then you went out of college, you went to the Marine Corps, and so just tell us a little bit about your path, and then we'll open it up for questions.
It's certainly a blessing to be with you, Jim, in this incredible surprise. And my theory of information, which I filched from Claude Shannon, is that information is essentially surprising bits, unexpected bits. So the idea that information is the most predictable outcome, which is a premise almost of much current artificial intelligence, is refuted by this whole evening of surprises. And it's exciting to be here. And I've been, I think I got a lot of this, of my writing inspiration and my ideas from my father, who I never knew. I knew only through divine paths and passages. I mean, my father was editor of the Crimson and a leading figure at Harvard, and he, in 1936, went with David Rockefeller, who was a friend, to Germany, and he saw Hitler. And he concluded that Hitler would have to be stopped. I mean, that this man was, couldn't be accommodated. He had to be essentially defeated. And so my father devoted the rest of his life to organizing a movement for entry into the Second World War. And he did civilian flight training, and he went and ended up in Flying Fortress, which was a B-17 fighter bomber that was the most advanced plane of the epoch, but it couldn't fly across the Atlantic in a storm. So about half of them were lost, and my father was lost. But the story I really like to tell, that I still can't really explain, is that I've had all sorts of setbacks early in my career. I flunked out of Harvard. I went into the Marine Corps and was in the Marine Reserves. I didn't have any heroic Marine experience, but it was better education than Harvard in many ways. Eventually, I went and with George Romney. Everybody remember President George Romney?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Romney, and I had to write a book for Romney. And went out to Michigan and hid out in Michigan writing this book. And meanwhile, the money for the book disappeared. And I was left in a motel in Michigan trying to figure out what to do next. But I'd written most of this draft of a book called The Mission and the Dream at the time for Romney. It was a fine guy, but he wasn't going to be president. And so I'd already written a draft of Wealth and Poverty before a first rough draft, but the experience of researching it and exploring the ideas had already been followed in this absolutely depressive experience in a motel for months in Lansing, Michigan. And so I could, when by the time Reagan was coming along, I decided to take this mission and the dream and make it into Wealth and Poverty. The first title of Wealth and Poverty was The Pursuit of Poverty, which might have explained why it achieved no advance whatsoever from any publisher. But wrote Wealth and Poverty, and it, without any real economic education. I did not, this was not a product of Harvard's economics department, which I never experienced. I did study international strategy with Henry Kissinger, and that was a really positive and interesting and game theory of it, but no economics. And Wealth and Poverty came out, and it was Reagan's favorite book. When he was shot by Hinckley and was in the hospital, and Bob Dole, then majority leader, came to pay tribute, Reagan gave a copy of Wealth and Poverty to Dole on camera and told him to read it. And so, I mean, this was the kind of thing that you couldn't possibly organize, like this dinner that Jim has contrived. This was something, a surprise. And it made the book was a huge bestseller and a magical success all over the world. And I've got on 60 Minutes and all kinds of exciting exposure. And 10 years later, my uncle came to me, and with this manuscript he'd found in his attic, which was a book my father was writing when he left for Europe, and it was a book of economics of wealth and poverty. And it had supply side insights. It was, and nobody had told me a whit of this. I had absolutely no clue about this when I sat down and wrote Wealth and Poverty. I really, my mother remarried the first cousin of my father, and my father wasn't a prominent part of my life as I was, but he really visited me and guided me to Wealth and Poverty, I believe, and it was an absolutely amazing otherworldly experience that intensified my Christian beliefs and my rejection of the materialist superstition that Jim has so illuminated for the world. This idea that we're just merely atoms in various random arrangements has always seemed to me to be so preposterous that only an academic could believe it.
If you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, send me an email, tour@drjamestour.org, and we will get together, and I will share with you about why I embrace the resurrection of Jesus.
I had a question about your reading of the scriptures. I read the scriptures and I see a lot of the themes that you write about. Yeah. How did you come to read the scriptures as well? And did the scriptures play a part in developing your economic themes that you write about?
Well, my father did write me a short letter to be read when I was 16. And it told me not to trust him on scriptural questions, but to consult my mother and really listen to what she had to say. And my mother is a devout Christian. In her childhood, she discovered George MacDonald. And this was before George MacDonald was fashionable at all. I mean, and she read every book by George MacDonald in her childhood. She didn't go to college. She studied piano and became a just an amazing pianist that who was blessed at the end of her life by being discovered by Yo-Yo Ma. And she's the only person who's ever played a concert with Yo-Yo Ma after age 100. So my mother was quite a formidable person, and she guided me to the scripture and to George MacDonald and to C.S. Lewis, who also, of course, gave passionate and constant tributes to George MacDonald. And so it was really my mother most responsible for my Christian beliefs and commitments.
I want to ask you about the future of academia. It seems like in the Eisenhower era, people passed a lot of funding for actual scientific research. Then over time, in the decades, it has evolved towards more and more political justification. So then that's where the funding started going. So then now we see the political justification machine break in the COVID era, where the public confidence in the institutions are starting to decline. So, and then what's happening is that recently we find that because Americans have like a 5th grade reading level, it's more effective to pay the lobbying firms and the propaganda machines on history to publish pieces rather than the academics. So my question is, with this recent cut in funding, do you think it's the end of an era where like basically like the Republicans will cut the funding to the academics, and the Democrats, when they re-expand the budget, they'll expand it to the J Street lobbyists instead of the institutions?
Yeah, well, that's a brilliant, you should write that essay. It's very insightful, and I think, I guess my essential belief is this academic establishment is teetering. It's being discredited. And that new institutions are emerging that will pioneer surprising ideas and explore human creativity in the image of our Creator. This whole mode of Christian and civilization, which has really been abandoned by the academy in the clutches of what I call the materialist superstition, belief that there's nothing except material. And so I think that the Rice, I mean, look at you've experienced revitalization of an American university. I mean, I'd hardly heard of Rice except as a football team when I was growing up, and now there are giant new buildings to accommodate the ideas of Jim Tour. They don't understand that it's a futile effort to accommodate the ideas of Jim Tour in a building. But anyway, it does suggest that these universities can be revitalized by visionary leadership and creativity that you're blessed with down here.
So let me just follow up on that. So you feel that the U.S. universities in general, as they've been going, they're really in a decline because of. Be more specific. What is it that they did that is causing their demise, that is then beckoning other sorts of institutions to rise up?
Yeah. The materialist superstition is the essential idea which is embodied in a mechanical vision of Darwinian evolution, that's embodied in the idea that life is somehow, and consciousness somehow are emergent from matter, that it in turn is the climax of essentially random process. The materialist superstition is crippling. I mean, AI probably is the most exciting development. It's the latest computer platform, and it's a thrilling advance. But all its leading exponents don't have a clue about what they've actually accomplished. They think somehow that this system of pattern recognition from internet data yielding large language models will somehow attain consciousness and possibly perpetrate an apocalypse, a singularity. So it's kind of a competitive path to the divine, where the divine creates, where humans create the divine rather than the divine creates and animates and lends purpose to human beings.
Okay. So, like, there's right now a big focus on increasing I guess, the power of the United States, and like, I guess the current political environment is like, how do we make the U.S. as powerful as we used to be closer to, let's say, China? I mean, do you think that we should be focusing on increasing our international power or domestic powers? Like, should we invest in Chinese companies for, say, so then they can then participate in the international economy, which then decreases the power of China? Or do you think we should invest in the U.S. to make ourselves relatively stronger?
I don't think an either-or issue, a way of framing the issue, is fruitful. I don't think governments have the choice of deciding whether we're going to invest in American companies and projects or Chinese companies and projects. I think all of these ideas really falsify what human creativity is. It comes as a surprise, and if the government thinks it can already predict the future, it actually forecloses the future through its predictive process. So I think that it's really, I don't think we should try to control the economy. The reason the U.S. manufacturing has been paralyzed and thwarted is because of this vast excrescence of the administrative state that is increasingly falsified and twisted the entrepreneurial efforts of the people, and that's the problem. And the remedy for this problem isn't to try to impose extend the power of this apparatus to China or other countries. It's to emancipate human creativity in the image of our Creator.
Because of you, millions of people have heard the gospel. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that he's risen from the dead, and you will be saved. That's right. That's the requirement. We talk about science concepts which draw people in. Take these nanomachines and have them drill into cells. This would be a great way to kill cancer, right? We also talk about Jesus Christ, who's the best in everything. My faith in Jesus Christ means more to me than anything. If you could continue to give or give for the first time, we would certainly appreciate it. You can go to jesusandscience.org. Thank you so much.
Well, following on to that, like most, I guess, organizations, companies, cities, states, whatever, countries have like a very brief period where they're very innovative. And then I guess once it becomes corrupt, they start to demise, right? Do you think that the US is able to recover from this? Or do you think that, I guess, we're just flapping our arms around and we'll end up drowning anyway?
Yep. Well, I think history is not readily predictable, and that the American system, with its 50 states and separate sources of creativity and power and experimental opportunities, allows recovery and allows a revival. And so, and I think there are a lot of sources of vitality and revival in the country. I think we're in. I've just I wrote the introduction to a book called Superabundance, which by Gail Pooley and I just, by the way, in today's Wall Street Journal, for a surprise, I have an article that I wrote with Gail Pooley, providing all numbers and economic data. And that Wall Street Journal article says that we're in an era of incredible progress and promise, and that measuring value by time rather than by money that was debauched. We've completely, money no longer signifies any reliable value, so that since Nixon left the gold standard back in 1971, money is, for most of the time, has been just allowed to be printed as whenever convenient by governments. And that has destroyed the significance of most of the monetary valuations you see in economic data. And I believe that ultimately money is tokenized time, that the real measure of value is time prices, which Yale Nobel laureate William Nordhaus really introduced back in 1994 in a famous paper that challenged the GDP figures and showed that by measuring the time price of lighting from cave fires of the Neanderthals through candles at Versailles, through whale oil lamps, and through Edison's light bulb, and on to light-emitting diodes, that economic data had almost totally missed this whole ascent of value in the economy, that the advances in the value of lighting technology measured by the time it takes a typical worker to earn the money to purchase illumination, and open up the night was thousands of times greater than was measured in any of the economic figures. And today, from my point of view, GDP data assumes the value of all of this government spending that's mostly notional and much of it destructive. And it's so government spending is valued at cost in GDP. And the real time price of government spending, I believe, taking all the administrative state, is vastly negative. And so you have government spending estimated at the value of at cost, and private sector spending suffers from this time price distortion identified by Nordhaus as 1,000-fold or more, and then documented in Superabundance, this book by Gail Pooley and Marion Tupy, which uses time prices and applies them through history and demonstrates that today we live in a golden age of incredible prosperity and opportunity, and entirely unmeasured by the government data that everybody cites. And so we live in this sort of fake statistical world that ignores the kind of output of Jim Torr's labs at Rice, and the discovery of graphene and its properties, which really defied the prevailing physical theories. The graphene was assumed to disintegrate if you had a single layer of graphite, and it occasioned, there have been 5 Nobel Prizes for new explanations of 2D materials and topological physics, and there's it is a new era, and it's being revitalized. And I don't think it's this sort of assumption that we're losing something to China, or that China stole something from us, or any of these models have any use at all, in my view. And so we got a kind of clueless global political regime, worshiping power and mostly afflicted by the materialist superstition that essentially believes that human life is meaningless except for the accumulation of power. And that vision has rendered most of the political institutions depraved, but there's still sources of incredible incandescence of new ideas and creativity, and I think that is we should look for the opportunities, the impact of carbon nanotubes on silicon carbide materials, and rather than worry too much about the latest tariff pronouncement.
I think that one of the contentions I have is that this argument that deflation is absolutely negative should be more challenged. And what you're talking about with abundance and with time being the measurement suggests that measuring monetary inflation as our primary foe is probably the wrong way to be looking at the world. Now, it would be helpful if we had solid money, but putting that aside, it would argue towards pursuing more and more technologies that are both increasing the amount of time that we have and increasing the productivity of it, which is deflationary by definition.
Right. I mean, whether you want to use the word deflation to describe human creativity and flourishing is questionable, but it's really at the heart of wealth and poverty was a phenomenon called the learning curve, which Bruce Henderson of the Boston Consulting Group contrived, and Bain and Company later developed as the experience curve. But in general, it demonstrated across the whole range of human industries that costs drop between 20 and 30% for every doubling of total units sold. And I believe that Moore's law is essentially in semiconductors, the multiplication of transistors, really represents another manifestation of the learning curve. And I think that learning produces knowledge, and wealth is essentially knowledge. And it's, the measurement of it is time. Money is tokenized time. So it's, I really think I'm pretty extreme on the view that the current the idea that's popular in economics, that it takes vast numbers of economists to tabulate the progress of the gross national product, that somehow epitomizes the progress of all of human imagination, is spurious and sterile. So, and so I'm working on new economic models, and I'm certainly inspired by Jim and this pursuit, and vindicated by Jim, I think.
On that question of measuring an economy, what metric would you use? So GDP is flawed. What would you point to as a good measurement of the health of an economy?
Well, a good measurement of value as reflected in fulfillment of human needs and desires is time prices. When you run out of money, what's really happening is you're running out of the time to earn more money. That's what's happening. Money is essentially tokenized time, and so I believe that starting with this insight, you can build economic data that at least reflects some real economic values. Now, economic values can be debauched by a cultural and religious collapse. And so this is not a time prices will not redeem you if you're following a depraved model of economic value. So, but it does at least give you authentic basis that all the other sciences, mostly, if you take all the various standards of measurement in France, they collect all the kilogram, the lumen, all the meter, all these, all the various standards of measurement for the physical world are ultimately rooted in the speed of light. You find some reference to that is ultimately rooted in the speed of light limit, and all the foundations of the value of a kilogram or a lumen of light or a all those measurements. And so economics also has to submit to the speed of light limit and to the a rule of time as the measuring stick of value.
You spoke of this not having a physical basis for our money, our cash anymore. What do you tell us about cryptocurrency? How that fits into this? The amount of energy that's going to be needed, and then you have the Bitcoin, which is sort of capped, versus Ethereum, which is more open, and then you also have the problem of lots of cryptocurrencies can just spring up over and over again. So enlighten us on this.
Well, I think that the invention of the blockchain was a fundamental invention. The best embodiment of it may be the Hedera hash graph, may be the most useful form of the blockchain that has emerged so far. And it does ultimately have roots in time. Bitcoin, by being capped, it cannot be a currency, cannot convey the properties of time, which is scarce in the present and infinite in the future. There's this paradoxical property of time that lends it its magic can't be captured by a limited Bitcoin model. But I believe that the conjunction of blockchains with their root in the time it takes to perform these hashing functions that validate the blockchain independently this affords great possibilities for the emergence of a new money, and I think a new, valid, and more useful money that can foster creativity and growth. And we'll see whether this happens. Hedera is making huge gains these days, and it's been adopted by Google and NVIDIA and other companies now, and we'll see what happens and how it plays out. But I think there's the first time in my memory we actually have creativity in money, and the effort to invent new, more valid forms of money, and I think this is a positive. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that the ones that currently exist has yet somehow consummated the possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Holden.
I think we can agree that overregulation is hindering innovations that can help fulfill human needs and increase our productivity, but there's a reason why we have laws. And what do you say to those who fear that moving in a direction towards deregulation would enable bad actors more?
Well, I don't think it. I mean, I think the current regulatory order fosters bad actors. It rewards bad actors. It rewards people who regard power divorced from moral order and civilization as somehow sufficient. So I think that the attack on the administrative state was sort of amoral regulatory regime is positive. And I think regulation has to be tied to responsibility of particular people. And regulation today is widely treated as a way to avoid responsibility for particular positive outcomes. And a friend of mine named Philip Howard has written about 7 or 8 books on this subject of the administrative state. He was Al Gore's roommate at Tennessee, and so he and I don't exactly agree on all matters, but I think has very penetrating insights onto the flaws of the regulatory state. He's got the American Citizen or whatever it is movement, and he's got these books, which I can't remember the names. They all have named Regulation and Power and I don't know, but they repeat the same very edifying themes. He's one of the nation's leading lawyers, and he believes that the legal profession has lost track of the foundations of law, and it's the link of law with responsibility and with the moral order all have to be restored in order to have an effective governing system.
So back into the currency thing, like what innovations do you expect from forming a new currency? Because usually like people make new currencies for the purpose of financing or for the purpose of like making a new business. Like, for example, Starbucks has their gift cards. They have like over 2 billion unredeemed gift cards. Or like you have like United Airlines, who's making literally more money off of travel tokens than their flights themselves. Like, I would argue that those are new currencies too, but they're fundamentally doing still the same thing. So for cryptocurrency, how do you see it, I guess, enabling anything that's new?
The burden of proof is on me, and you may be right that cryptocurrency, I think that these values that are embodied in these sort of spurious currencies that Starbucks or what was the other company, or what? United Airlines, whatever. I mean, I think they all function within the structure of the dollar and its promiscuous printing process. So I don't think they're so significant, these currencies. While currencies that actually can't be manipulated or freely printed, or that actually have roots in a real measuring stick, have more promise. That the United Airlines, whatever it is, the
Starbucks.
The Starbucks. I like the Starbucks credits, but they're just another way to buy coffee. I mean, they aren't. I don't think they have much. They buy coffee more efficiently without having to go up to the counter, or there are various ways this. I don't think those are alternative monies. I think they're part of the existing monetary order, and I think it's possible that the entrepreneurial experiments with cryptocurrencies are going to yield an advance in finance that's valuable. And I can't prove it because it hasn't happened yet, except perhaps with Hedera, which really has proved to have utility. Well, it certainly led me to reject the idea of just prevailing opinions having some validity. I mean, I've been, from my first book I wrote by myself, I've been always contrarian. And I think my Christian faith gave me confidence to be contrarian. If you don't have a faith in an order beyond our terrestrial predicament, you can't be confident in spurning the prevailing fatuities.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. You and I attend a meeting together quite often, which I like to call it a meeting of the nonconformists.
Mm.
And so everybody who attends this meeting is invited because they're not conforming in their respective areas. And you see that at least half of the people in that nonconformist meeting are committed believers in Jesus Christ.
Yep.
Jesus was a nonconformist, and he dealt a lot with the leadership that was trying to get him to conform. And you see the prophets. Every one of the prophets was hated. Very few people liked the prophets, and they were nonconformists in their generation. And there's something about walking with Jesus that inspires you to do that because you're following his example. And his teachings are radically non-conforming. Mm. And so we sort of head in that direction because of Jesus.
Yeah.
He is the most wonderful model for us. And when the world is going one way, we go another way. And this is because of Jesus. Plus, on top of that, he gives us hope that we're doing the right thing. Because to be a nonconformist, you're always wondering, am I doing the right thing? I mean, everybody else says it's the opposite way.
Oh.
But then when we have the assurance through the scriptures that what we're saying is good and right, and this is going to be, in the long run, much better for humankind, it gives us a much greater assurance. And Jesus told us that when they come against you, it's not because of you, it's because of me, Jesus said. It's because of him. It's because of Jesus. What do you think?
What do you think? I can't improve on that eloquence and insight. The only thing I can add is that the guidance of Jesus doesn't necessarily have to be explicit. I mean, if you have the belief, the contrarian insights arrive, and I told the story of how my father wrote my book in a sense, and I didn't know he was doing it, or he was doing it. And I have to say that I can't explain today. I mean, at age 24 or something, I wrote a book called Sexual Suicide that's still in print, that just had a new edition this year from, and I wrote it almost 70 years ago. No, it's not 70 years ago, 60 years ago. And when I wrote it, I was nominally Christian, but I didn't, but it wasn't it wasn't explicitly Christian, and it. But somehow I read it today, and it seems somehow to suffused in many ways with Christian insights about the family and its indispensable role in civilization. And most of the deterioration in the society, I think, is manifestations of family breakdown, and which I predicted was on its way, and sexual suicide, published, I think, in 69, 70. The first big cover story in Harper's was, which resulted in 2 subsequent issues of Harper's with the letters collection completely devoted to responses, was it was contrarian, and it's what we're living through now, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
In light of that, what do you think is the future of feminism?
Well, that's what the book is about. I think the future of feminism is to realize the unique gifts and superiority of women, and but not to try to mimic men or try to nullify our sexual natures or to twist them into some pleasure machine, or it's and to understand that it's the sexes and families perpetuate the race, and if the insights that underlie the family collapse, our populations will disappear. And it's promising today that the people who actually believe in family life and the centrality of family in our lives are producing the next generation, and so that's and then we have the challenge of Islam, and secular society is committing sexual suicide, as I describe it, and it will decline in influence as a result. And although it will attempt to grasp for power as an alternative to progeny, that pursuit will ultimately fail.
You see, the family as a business model, back in the ancient times, it would be the grandparents taking care of the kids and the young people going out and working. And then that repeating itself over and over. Now was industrialization, when now you only have a 2-generation family where you have the parents that have to work and the kids. So the question is, how do we go back to that?
Well, I think if you look at Christian communities, you see a fabric of families that goes back into the past and leads on to the future, and with increasing technology, families can remain in quite intimate contact across the globe. I've a daughter and 2 grandchildren in Thailand at the moment, and my wife Nini reads books to the children over Zoom or Skype or whatever it is every week, and I think that there are ways that families can be reinvented without nullifying their essential role in perpetuating the species within a Christian culture of futurity and morality.
Can I just mention something? The first time I met George, I didn't see him. I only heard him, because we were on a he and his daughter were sitting behind me on an airplane, and we were going, I believe it was from Germany to Nice, and to this nonconformist meeting, and I had never met George before, and I believe it was from Frankfurt Airport, and so it was only like, I don't know, a couple hours, hour and a half, something like that, but I heard behind me this man speaking with his daughter, George speaking with his daughter. So I just heard a man's voice and a woman's voice, and they were engaging in a conversation that was purely scientific and mathematical, and they were going at each other in a really robust way. And it wasn't like that this was a timid young student I thought it was a PhD student with her mentor, the way they were going back and forth in a conversation, or a postdoc with a mentor. And then when we got off the plane, then all of us were met, the three of us were met by the same limo driver, and they put us in a beautiful van together to take us to the place. So we got to talking, and I introduced myself. He says, "Jim Tour, I know you. I know your work. You work with carbon nanotubes and this sort of thing." Now, I had never heard of George Gilder before, and that's only because I'm nano. I study just a very small portion of life. But the way that you engaged with your daughter, the relationship that you had with your daughter, and this was about 5 years ago, or 5 or 6
10
years
years ago, probably, Jim. I think so. Maybe 8.
Maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I do is I see that afternoon, George is out jogging with his daughter, and they're both running together. And I thought, this is a man, what I really like to see is not what men just talk about, but how they relate to their grown children. How does a man relate to his grown children tells me a lot about a man, because there are many men that have accomplished a lot in life, but their children want nothing to do with them. Their grown children just don't want to be around them. And so when I saw this man and the relationship that you had with your daughter, and then I learned that your daughter wrote, what was it, String Theory for Dummies or something?
No, she wrote Age of Entanglement.
Age of Entanglement.
And it's entanglement physics, quantum theory. And she wrote this in her 20s, and it was a major book, Knopf published, Louisa Gilder, Age of Entanglement. And during the course of researching it, she discovered John Clauser, who had been at Caltech, but had somehow left under a cloud or something, and had nobody knew where he was. And Louisa searched him out, ultimately went on his sailboat with him to interview him. And he now gives her credit for his Nobel Prize last year. Clauser got the Nobel Prize, one of the 3 people, and all of whom were key figures in The Age of Entanglement, written 20 years ago, written in 1980 something. So, and Clauser, when he got the Nobel Prize, used it to denounce climate change. So I was I thought Clauser had a good, that my daughter had achieved a good goal. My brother-in-law, and a historian at Ohio State, has written a massive tome on the history of the climate. And he had to endorse climate change at the end in order to be published. I shouldn't say that. He actually has been convinced by the climate change cult that to me, in this dense book, it's John Brooke of Ohio State. He's a formidable historian, and it's a brilliant book that expounds the history of climate in incredible detail and authority, and shows that the complexity is just far beyond any of these little toy models that copy each other and converge to ascribe to changes in CO2 everything that happens in the weather. And so I mean, it's amazing, but I have to concede that John probably believes that CO2 controls the weather and portends a catastrophe. And in my book, The Life After Capitalism, it really, this is emergency socialism. You declare an emergency, and then you surrender authority to the political leadership. So the new form of socialism is emergency socialism, and it consists of these kinds of declarations that get translated into a cult that captivates almost all of academia, and it becomes a strange religion that ultimately reflects the materialist superstition, in my view. That's I could talk about, I've really been following climate change. Art Robinson, who is he was a Caltech figure worked with Linus Pauling for decades, and then I did a newsletter with Esther Dyson, and met her father Freeman Dyson, who is a great contributor to physics, and all these formidable scientists who guided my education, and later Will Happer and people, and Richard Lindzen, all these actual scientists rather than government-funded cult leaders believe that we probably don't have enough carbon dioxide, that CO2's crucial to living things, and that there's a greater danger of too little than too much. And Matt Ridley, who is a brilliant polymathic writer from Britain, who I've spent a lot of time, just all these major figures in my life who I respect and appreciate have independently, not collectively, but independently arrived at a categorical rejection of the climate change vision, and so, or the climate change emergency. So I may be too confident in my views on this subject, Jim. No.
I'm not sure that you're too confident. I just will say that to be a nonconformist on this issue in the academy is very hard.
Yep.
Because you don't get funded if you say anything against it. And this brings us back to what you were saying in the beginning, that there are people outside of the academy, or people that were old enough that they weren't dependent on federal funding so they could come out and say these sort of things. If a young investigator had ever said the things that you just said, it could be a real problem for them in the academy, and something where they would never even get tenure as a result of saying just the very simple things that you just said. So that this could be the beginnings, as you're saying, of these other institutions that will come up and replace these things where you have to go along with what's being said, or they just clobber you. They keep you out of the societies, they keep you out of getting funding. And you could say, well, no, you can write a proposal and submit it, but you really can't, because the system is set up such that if you try to write a proposal that's too contrary to they'll give you so many things to do, and all you need in an NSF proposal is you need all excellence. Excellence. If you give get one good, you're toast. It's over. So all it takes is one reviewer to say good, boom, you're not funded, and you go a few years like that, and you don't get tenure. And you're out of the system. So that it's very hard when something has been so ingrained to come against the system. Have you ever felt that, Laszlo?
Oh, I know so. I got one of those goods. That was it.
That's it.
For that side.
And Carver Mead, my whole transition to writing about semiconductors and with microcosm, and most of my books have been rooted in microchips, and my new one is Life After Chips. Wafer scale integration, everybody. And
carbon.
What?
Carbon.
Carbon.
That's what your book's about.
Yeah, carbon. But Carver Mead started me on this path, and he's a great Caltech person who did the first tunnel diodes, and then wrote the key book on VLSI, and he's probably the leading living intellectual in electronics from Caltech.
And he comes to your yearly meeting.
Yeah, he's been
still
doing my COSM conferences with Discovery Institute. I've founded Discovery Institute with Bruce Chapman, and Carver Mead really has been the heart of this of my COSM conferences, telecosm, microcosm. I've had COSM conferences for 50 years now, and he's attended just about every one of them, and he never had any particular belief in the climate change. I don't want to quote him, but he gave me plenty of confidence to deny that we faced any kind of climate emergency that justified the Gauleiters coming in and taking over rice.
Yeah, well, you're not dependent on federal funding for your subsistence.
Yeah,
that's the difference. And things could well be changing. You look at what's happening to so many schools, and their funding is being turned down until they come under new regulations, and you're seeing a huge shift. And it's really interesting to see what's going to happen. When you take our best institutions and you cut off their funding like that for research, it is a huge problem. You have all these students to pay, all these things, and then all of a sudden you hear you can't spend any money, it's off. I was just speaking at Cornell this week, and I was supposed to have dinner on Tuesday night with the president of the university, and he couldn't come because he had to just figure out how he was going to come up with $1 billion to turn this funding back on.
No.
And so something had to be done to get their attention. And I had said, in fact, I just spoke with one of the guys that does my YouTube stuff. I said, didn't I speak to a group of academics in like 2016 or 2017 and tell them that this was going to happen? If you keep dumping on the general public, it was shortly after President Trump had been elected the first time, And we had this meeting, and the meeting was in Israel, and these American scientists were saying how stupid the United States is that half of the people would vote for Donald Trump, and half of the people don't even embrace evolution, and half of the people do all these dumb things. And I stopped. I said, wait a minute. Did you know that half of those people that you're talking about, that those people, the very people you're talking about, half the country funds your research? And I said, a lot of them are very wealthy. And if you think stupid people can make a lot of money, they can't. These people are very smart and make a lot more money than you guys do. And they're going to soon turn around and say, we're not going to have it anymore. Why should we pay for this research when these people talk about us this way? So I just spoke to my producer today. I said, bring up that video. Let me take a look at it. And maybe we'll say, hey, this really was predictive of what was going to happen. Yeah. And this is part of this elite academy that thinks that everybody is like them. If you go to Rice University, it's 90% of the people are Democrats. If you go to Harvard, it's supposed to be something like 97% of the faculty are Democrats. How can this be when half of the country is not Democrats? How can it be? And it must be because it's become self-selecting. It's become self-selecting, and it's not because the people who are not Democrats are idiots. It's not because of that. And so this was almost predictable.
No.
What do you think?
What do you think?
Well, a better explanation is that the smarter people are the people who left and made money, and then the dumb ones are left in the university.
Okay, well,
so that's why we should write.
And they're not having children anymore, so they're going to die out.
So what we should do is that we should write a book on this called Clean Energy's Dirty Secrets.
Called what?
Clean Energy's Dirty Secrets.
Okay.
Clean Energy's Dirty Secrets.
Clean Energy's Dirty Secrets.
I mean, the DOE funding is gone anyway, so you might as well write it.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of it. I spent today with MTM and Nighthawk, and they're to show how the world can misjudge a subject. I learned about the glut, the potential glut of rare earth elements, how something that's rare can be a glut, is one of the paradoxes that Steve down there is resolving. An MTM company, which is using flash Joule heating. Dewey Long is at your student, and really invented flash Joule heating, and it's now being applied to the production of rare earth elements, rendering them abundant.
Right.
And rather than erecting tariffs against foreign rare earth elements, we might as well actually harvest the vast bounties of rare earth elements in electronic scrap and other and red mud of bauxite and all these other sources of these essential metals for the future of civilization.
Yes, this is the difference between science and policy. So what happens is lawmakers make a policy. We are going to do X, Y, Z. You have to have a certain type of car with these standards by such and such a date. And the technology is just not there. I mean, you can proclaim it, but it's not going to make it happen. It's not going to make it happen that you're going to have this. I remember even 35 years ago, regulations happening in California that by 2010 they were going to have, 70% of the cars had to be electric by 2010. They proclaimed it. Nothing happened. They can proclaim all of these things and nothing happens. It's when you drive the science, let the scientists get at this thing and empower them to do it. If you want it done, they'll figure out a way. This whole thing of AI, that they're scaring you, that we're going to run out of electricity, we're going to run out of energy for AI because AI is going to consume it all. Really, there's a lot of solutions to this. You just build devices that use 1,000 times less energy, because you can you can conceive of devices that use 1,000,000 times less energy. So to get it 1,000 times less energy is certainly doable. So you build devices that will use less energy. Then this AI scare that it's going to suck up all of our electricity goes away. It just goes away, just like that. So it's a technological solution rather than trying to drive something by policy.
The only point is that if they, if you make it 1,000,000 times cheaper, we'll use 1,000,000 more. And that's old Jevons paradox, we know.
You mentioned previously, you talked about moral responsibility. And also we're talking about innovation. Jack Dorsey recently tweeted, delete all IP laws. I don't know if you guys saw that recently. And then Elon Musk said, I agree.
What did he say?
He said, delete all IP law.
Intellectual property law.
Yeah. So what is your opinion on using law to protect ideas and how we can help when powerful people get at the top and want to remove all things that they use to get to the top? What is your opinion on protection of ideas?
Well, I know that our experience with patents has been mixed, but that they have been very useful in some fields, and in other fields, the field I study is semiconductors, where patents really are, all just put into a pool and traded. And in other words, the tie of a particular patent to a particular innovation is pretty much eclipsed. In other words, in the foundation of our electronic era, the foundational sciences of our electronic era have had to escape the trammels of patents. So the patent law, but I think entrepreneurs can figure out ways to circumvent or adapt to the regulations that are applied, and they're doing it. And that's part of the entrepreneurial creativity, is learning how to deal with patent laws in the face of the incredible intricacy of a microchip that embodies thousands and thousands of innovations in a chain that is almost impossible to define, let alone litigate. And so I think, I think probably we could do without patents, but innovators would have to be even more nimble than they are.
Let me give you my thoughts.
Yeah, you give me your thoughts. I'm just blabbing away. I really don't know the answer to this question.
And I'm writing them all the time, and so I'm practically enslaved to them, because once you file a patent, then you got years and years of office actions you got to deal with, and then you got to deal with protecting them. So people have been writing to me recently, and they say, they give the example of Elon Musk, where he patents very little, and he's producing like crazy, and they give me that example. Now, if I had $40 billion burning a hole in my pocket, I wouldn't be dependent upon others to take these technologies to the market. But if I can't get them protected, then there's no return on investment for an investor, and they're not going to invest in it, and then it never sees the light of day, because I can't take my academic research and bring it to a product because I don't have $100 million in my pocket. And so this is what is needed. And the only way that somebody from the outside is going to look at this is to say, hey, I'll invest in that, is when they can make a profit. And if they can't have some space to operate and some time period to make back their money, it never gets developed. So without the patent protection, it's ball game over for any of these inventions, as far as I'm concerned. Now, if I had lots and lots of my own money, I could do it myself. And some people say, well, companies, drug companies, they should just invest in that for the good of society. But then there's no drug company left. And you have a gun to your head by the SEC says you have to make a profit for your shareholders. So you can't just do things for the public good over and over and over again. You've got to somehow do this, or there is no. So I think it would stifle innovation from really being developed.
I think what's going to happen is that eventually people are going to write very powerful AI models to basically create combinations that can basically flush all sorts of different variations of patents. So then the standard of obviousness and inventiveness has to go up. And then when that happens, I think the reactive thing from the regulators is that, well, because people are no longer involved in this, and it's just how much capital you put in to generate all these combinations of everything, then the question is whether or not we should still have this constitutional right, because then pretty much like the people with the most amount of money and the ability to fund computers writing these variations would patent everything.
Now, that's an interesting thought, that you have computers doing essentially what some individuals do, that are hired to just sit around and break others' patents by thinking up combinations that you didn't cover in your claims. And so, yes, it might change the standards, but there's going to have to, I mean, capitalism works, right? I mean, you read a lot about capitalism. And if everything goes to the state, or if there's no way for the individual to make this money, it's not going to happen. And you see this trend in the United States. It was with the Bayh-Dole Act that allowed patents generated, that allowed intellectual property generated in universities to be owned by the universities. Prior to that, if it was funded by the federal government, it was owned by the federal government, and nothing got developed coming out of universities. Nothing got developed because the faculty member wouldn't make any money. It was all owned by the federal government. And so when it was owned now by the university, now the faculty member could license it from the university and generate. And you see what happened with the Bayh-Dole Act right after that in the early 80s. All of a sudden, then in the mid 80s, all these companies just started coming out of universities, burst. And I remember when the UK, they came from the embassy, from the UK embassy in the US, and they came to my office and they said, this was right around 1999, 2000. They said, how come there's all these startup companies in the US? How does this happen? I said, the Bayh-Dole Act. They said, what's that? I said, you go back and you read that, you give ownership to the university, and then you'll spawn all of this. They went back, they did that, and it started happening in the UK as well. So you have to give freedom for people to exploit what they've done and give them a chance to do that. What do you think?
Well, what was the year of the Bayh-Dole Act?
Was it somebody Google, somebody at ChatGPT? I'm going to say like 1982. Was that your idea actually?
No.
It was under Ronald Reagan.
It was under Reagan,
yes.
Wasn't it? At the beginning of the Reagan administration, or
1980.
All right. Maybe what we need is another act that takes takes the intellectual property and then assigns it to the individual professors and the students who are actually making the intellectual.
Well, essentially, they get it anyway. They're the ones who can exploit it. So it's owned by the university, and then you license it from the university. So essentially, they get it anyway. And if you assign it to the individual professor, then he or she has to pay all the filing costs and everything. And they don't have all that up front. And here the university has that, and then the university gets reimbursed once you've raised your money. So that would cause other problems.
Do you think that the rise of litigation and the sort of mazes of patent maneuvering that has emerged has really crippled our system of intellectual property. I mean, there are far fewer, in just pure numbers, since the Buy Act, the portion of the U.S. economy comprised by small businesses has declined. I don't know, just in the portion of total corporate value held by Google and the Magnificent Seven or whatever.
That's really the issue that's driving it, is that there's nothing that forces the very large companies, nothing that keeps them from acquiring all the IP bought all, but there is small companies, and because you've done that, you've eliminated the growth trajectory. I mean, $1 billion company is small now. And so you've eliminated that growth trajectory because it gets eaten by a $1 trillion company.
Which is not bad for the inventor. It's a great exit. I mean, it's a great exit. You don't have to have an IPO. You just, boom, you sell it.
But the problem is then instead of the federal government just burying it, Google's burying it. And so what you need to have is, I would argue that you need to have a systematic approach that says if you're above a certain market cap, you can't acquire anything. And that would force them back into R&D, and it would open up those smaller companies.
Well, this is
VCs would hate
this has become their R&D though. So the drug companies aren't doing R&D. They let all the little companies do it. They bring it into phase 3, and it hits phase 3. Boom! They just gobble them. It's become if that's what they want to do, if they look at it as a lower risk opportunity.
But I think that gets back to the question of where you put that market cap. Because I think that you're seeing different actions in different.
So he wants more regulation actions.
Yeah, so well, I think functionally what I'm just suggesting is that you need to have a diffusion of talent in order to optimize that opportunity. I mean, and it actually the primary people that push regulation tend to be the very large companies. As it disappears into their overhead. I mean, this is the whole problem on the banking side, is that you have these huge banks that promulgate all these regulations so that anybody under a certain capital can't do it. The same reason, you have a smaller company that can't pursue and defend themselves from a Google lawsuit, so they end up capitulating.
Some people succeed.
True.
They go to Israel, right?
I mean, what really happened was that Sarbanes-Oxley cut off the IPO market, so they really only have the bolt-on M&A option left. So, I mean, if you kill the bolt-on M&A option, then the companies will just stop being formed.
Let me just say, we're gonna begin to wrap this thing up, and this has been an amazing evening. It's very rare you're gonna ever be able to sit with a guy like George Gilder, who's really a historical figure. You think about Reaganomics. You had 18% interest rates under Jimmy Carter. 18%. I mean, so people are crying about 6%. It was 18%, and something happened under the Reagan administration. And Ronald Reagan read this book, Wealth and Poverty, in the beginning of his administration, and that's what set this thing off. And we're sitting with the man that really had a lot to do with this. So what I want you to do is just bring the whole thing home. Just close out, just summarize everything that's been said, and just put some cap on it with historical grace.
I think you did it.
So just bring it home.
Well, let's. I mean, your nanocosm is really the largest opportunity that's opened up in my lifetime, probably, and I think it's opened up. It's opened up here. It's opened up in Israel, and I think that most important book at the moment is the Israel Test, which is in its 3rd edition now and has come out, and really says we all face an Israel test, which derives from the superiority of some people. And the question is whether you admire the people who excel you and who pioneer new fields and new technologies and new ideas, or whether you resent them and try to tear them down. And that really is the Israel test. And the hostility to Israel is really derived from its just stunning achievements in technology and creativity. But as the Israel test shows, it started during the Second World War. If we hadn't admitted all the Jews from Europe, the scientists from Germany and Austria and everybody to man the Manhattan Project, we wouldn't have won the Second World War. We had to pass, General Groves had to pass his Israel test and name Oppenheimer the head of the project rather than I can't remember who the favored figure was, but this was a brave, and we have to, you know, if you, people are not the same. We have unique gifts, and unless we acknowledge the uniqueness of these gifts and accommodate them and try to learn from them rather than suppress them, our prospects are dim. But if we look for excellence and promote it, we can achieve the kinds of achievements that are incandescently present in Jim Torr's lab at Rice, and which has now yielded some 50 companies or more by now, right? Or
No, not 50.
Not 50, okay. But anyway, it's recognizing that that there is something magic in Israel that is not only epitomized by its biblical foundations and Christian fulfillment, but also by half of all the Nobel Prizes and by all the other attainments of Jews that, as Thomas Sowell has shown, are also duplicated by the overseas Chinese, and the overseas Chinese have suffered pogroms in Asia comparable to the ones that Jews have incurred in the West, and there's something, human beings have this choice whether they try to learn from people who are superior, or whether they try to discredit them and tear them down. And that's sort of the ultimate lesson I've arrived at over my lifetime.
So with that, I'm going to close it out in prayer. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this evening. I thank you for this evening that we've had with George Gilder. I pray your blessing to be upon him and upon his family. Lord, I pray the grace of God surround him, surround his wife and his children. In the name of Jesus, I pray that you continue to use this man, give him strength, wisdom, and insight. Lord, thank you for this time that we've had together. I pray that you bless our friends, lead them home safely. And Lord, through whatever we do, may Jesus Christ be glorified, because he is the best in every way. He is the Son of God, come to this earth and model for us what it is to worship God and to know him. Father, glorify yourself. Father, glorify your Son for the glory of Jesus. In the name and in his name, amen. Thank you for joining me today. If you could give us a like, share, or podcast review, we would appreciate it. If you have any questions, you could send them to ask@jesusandscience.org, and we'll try to answer some of those questions in an upcoming video. And if you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, and you want to hear about why I believe, send me an email to tour@drjamestour.org, and we'll get together by Zoom, and I'll share with you why I embrace the resurrection of Jesus Christ.